My name is Terri Pontremoli. I am a jazz person living a jazz life. I've been asked by Gail Boyd to be on this show, and thank you, Gail, for that. I am not used to soliloquies, so I feel a little self conscious about that. I hope you'll bear with me. But I'll talk about what I know. And when it comes to jazz, it's really what I love. So that should be easy. Um, so I came into jazz early as a child because my father was a jazz guitar player. And I grew up listening to him play in the house. And he was a weekend warrior kind of guy. He worked in a business during the day, but on Fridays and Saturdays, he gigged. And my parents had a wonderful record collection. And I mean, I grew up listening to all the standards and listening to jazz musicians play. But my father really wanted my sister and I to be classical musicians. So that was what we did. My sister was a pianist and I was a violinist. And so the great thing was my sister was a little older. So she was already pretty good at playing the piano by the time I picked up the violin. So I always was used to playing with another person. That whole collaborative thing was just a part of who I ended up being. I always feel good about being in the mix and working with others. And in my later years, where I have not been a musician, a working musician, the thing that I have missed most probably is the not the performances, but the rehearsals, and just being working with people and making music. That is something that I have to say I miss. But I certainly get my jollies listening to music. So anyway, where was I? So my sister and I, as children, played together, and we would spend lots of time sight reading Beethoven sonatas way before I was ready to play Beethoven sonatas. But it was just really fun to explore. And so I did that for a long time and went to music school at the Cleveland Institute of Music conservatory, and graduated and went directly into teaching and gigging for a life. And my first gig as a professional was playing with Isaac Hayes. That was one of the more wonderful things. We all showed up with our instruments, all of us violinists and cellists and violists, and we were told that we didn't need our instruments. And they gave us these hot pink violins that kind of glowed in the dark, but they were electric. And so the weird part about that was when you were sitting there playing, you didn't hear yourself under your ear. Obviously, it was coming out some other place, but that was one of my great experiences. But in all seriousness, I will say it was a time in the music business where people like Peggy Lee came through town and sang for a week at a theater, and we played 8 shows. People like Lena Horne, Sammy Davis Jr., just all kinds of really great musicians. And what I found the more I played was how much I loved not only the spontaneousness, the spontaneity of going into a show, getting the music right there on the spot, reading it down, and then playing the show that night, was the idea of playing all these wonderful charts, these arrangements. And it became very clear to me that when all these people toured, their rhythm sections were obviously jazz musicians, and the pianists were often the arrangers. And so you would see how wonderful the charts were. So even when I played with Gladys Knight, the charts for the strings were just terrific. And I remember playing with George Benson and being able to play that beautiful um, chart of Masquerade. The violin parts were just a knockout. So it was just a lovely thing, but it still kept me in a fascination point with jazz and jazz musicians and what they were able to do. I loved that when we would show up for rehearsals, the rhythm sections would always be like warming up and playing tunes and just kind of riffing and, you know, just having fun. So that was a really, it had a real meaning to me. And later on in my years, like after my father passed, I felt like there was a true calling for me to work in jazz. Certainly not to be a jazz musician, but to work in jazz. And so after all these years of teaching at the Cleveland Institute of Music and playing gigs and playing Broadway shows, and I was the contractor at Playhouse Square where we did lots of Broadway. I hired all the musicians, and it was fun. I'm not going to lie. I loved every minute of it. I really did. Um, but then I said, maybe it's time for me to look into arts administration. And I spent 1 year working at Cleveland Opera, and realizing that for as much as I loved playing opera, which I still, I mean, opera and jazz are right up there. Um, I just decided that I needed to look for something else. And the day that I submitted my resignation to Cleveland Opera, I called TriC Jazz Fest. And it turned out that there had been a change in leadership. There was a new guy running it. His name was Max Dane. And we talked on the phone, and he said, I think you should come in and we should talk. So I went in to see him, and I started working with TriC Jazz. It was really kind of hilarious. I think I was paid maybe 750, no, 7,000, $7,000 the first year I worked there. But it was a year of learning, and I was writing grants suddenly. I was doing marketing. I was making corporate presentations, all in the name of jazz and getting it out there. And Cleveland is such an interesting city in that when you think of Cleveland, you think of it as being an industrial city. You think of a lot of blue collar, but then there are these cultural bastions. The Cleveland Orchestra, which it's simply one of the best. The Cleveland Museum of Art, again, one of the best. And then after a while, Playhouse Square, which is now, I think, the largest theater complex outside of New York in the country. So, the bottom line is that I loved being a part of this city, but I also felt that jazz was living in the shadows. And when they built the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, that was like the frosting on the cake, because I kept thinking somewhere between the Cleveland Orchestra and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, there's this broad, beautiful body of music called jazz. And I really wanted to carry the banner for it in this town. And so that's what I started to do. I have a note from Michelle Taylor. Hello. And also Gail. Yes, I do see you. So I'm on. I can't talk and read at the same time. so I'm going to be challenged. But I do feel like I was freelancing in the time of where things were really rich as far as shows were concerned, and people going out and hearing music, not necessarily going out and just hearing rock concerts, but really going out to hear concerts of all kinds. So my mission with TriC was, let's raise money, let's put it on the map, let's celebrate our own history, let's get out in the community. One of the things that was and I still lose sleep over it, very disturbing at the time, we would have these educational days where high school bands would come from all over the region, and they would all come in and they would play we would have people like Clark Terry, and just, like Slide Hampton. It was just great. But we noticed that the kids from the Cleveland public schools were not present because they were really tearing out music programs. And I believe this has happened in so many cities. I know that the Cleveland Public Schools once upon a time had great music programs, but as they kept tearing out the arts because of money, um, they were robbing children of the ability to play instruments and also to learn about this body of music. So that was one of my strong, inspirations. Like, we've got to change this. Even with the Cleveland School of the Arts, which is part of the Cleveland Public Schools, they still had a jazz program that was terrible. And it was because the band director, who knew the classical stuff and knew marching band stuff, was not at all educated in jazz. So we got a small grant and we started working with the school directly and teaching the kids directly and getting jazz musicians in the community to teach. And we quickly grew the program. It was really kind of astonishing. So over the years, it's been really gratifying to see how many people we influenced, how many people we opened a door for. And as a matter of fact, I can look, like, we always talk about, there's Dominic Farinacci and Jerome Jennings and Sean Jones and people like that have that come through our doors and been a part of what we do at TriC Jazz Fest, who have gone on full circle, and made careers in this music and come back to Cleveland to perform or come back to Cleveland to teach. And that's why every artist that I bring in practically gets to do something educational with students, because I think it's so important. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is, and I think we might have brought Jeff and John Clayton in for this. We decided that instead of just having something during the day where the kids come in and do their educational thing and they play for these artists and then the artists workshop them on stage, instead of doing it just for students, we moved it to the evening and we invited adults. And it was so funny to see how people really became so quickly engaged that they could hear the difference when John or Jeff would suggest something. And it was just a beautiful thing to witness, the energy and the exchange, and also the fact that jazz just seems to be a metaphor for life. It just really does. And I think that the music itself and the musicians, it's kind of like what brings out what's best in all of us as Americans. It's something that I think we just really need to be cognizant of. It's so funny. The world is really large, and there's this network all over the world of people that work in jazz. It's still a small percentage, but it seems big, but then it seems small. But it's lovely to be a part of it, and I'm proud to be a part of it. The pandemic has really challenged all of us. I think, we all realized that for as much as we tried, and we were all of us engaged in doing programs online and talks online and really trying to fill that void. Man, there's still nothing like live music. And anytime we get to participate in live music, it's like such a healing experience. So 2 years ago, we were set to do a June festival, and in March, the pandemic hit. And so we decided that we would do something virtual, but we waited until August. And what we did was we featured all of our local jazz musicians and gave them a global stage. Generally, we bring in global musicians and do them in Cleveland, right? So it was the opposite way. But it was wonderful for the jazz musicians. They were so touched. I just remember Kip Reed, who is an electric bass player. When he was finished with his set, we recorded the sets and then we put them together in a program. he came backstage and he said, "Thank you, thank you." He said, I have been dreaming about playing. He said, they're always goofed up dreams. They're dreams like where I'm late for the gig and I don't have the right clothes and all that kind of stuff. But I have been dreaming about playing, and this means more to me than I can say. So it was just really touching and wonderful. And we had about 75,000 people tune in, which was really lovely because, again, we did it all with local musicians, and just kind of giving them a way to make money. We paid them nicely, and it just felt really a united, unifying thing to do. And then the next year, we thought we were going to go back to June, but then it looked like, nope, we're not going back to June. So we thought, well, look, people are looking for outdoor experiences. And in Cleveland Heights, we have this beautiful, small, charming amphitheater. It's not that small. I mean, it seats about 1,200 inside and about 700 outside. And so we thought, well, let's do a festival of young talent. We're not going to have a budget to do big artists and big names, but we can do small names and still make a festival out of it. So we did 2 days with 5 acts in each day. We had the likes of Emmett Cohen and Bria Schoenberg and Samara Joy and Lakeisha Benjamin and people like that. And it was truly wonderful. We really loved, the audience felt, I think they felt just special. I think everything just felt kind of glowy and wonderful. So I loved it. It was wonderful to program that way too. Just kind of like, these people are all going to be the heroes in music in the next 10 years anyway. So it was lovely to be able to put them on our stage and expose the Cleveland audience. I think about when I was a young adult, there were times like at certain clubs that you would see people like Joe Zawinul and Sonny Stitt and people like that would just kind of move through town, on their way between Chicago and Philly or Chicago and New York or whatever, that we would be able to see them in places like Cleveland. And that is such a cool thing. And I know it happens now with clubs, but it still is hard because the money is almost never right. We have been able to, as Jazz Fest, as an entity, we've been able to, like when an artist would come to Nighttown or the Bop Stop or something like that, we would be able to say, we can pay the artist extra money to do educational work. So it made it more worth their time to be in Cleveland, and then we would get the benefit of educating our students. So it's lovely to do. It's one of those things that I feel we just have to always be vigilant about, like never let your guard down, never think that there's not a student that you can't reach out there somewhere. I love watching students grow and develop. It's been terrific in Cleveland. Dominic Farinacci has been sort of an artist in residence, where he's been teaching on our Saturday program, the Jazz Academy, and those students are doing wonderful things. One student, Ava Preston, has won the Jazz Student Downbeat Award for Blues and Jazz for the past, I think she's won it 5 years in a row, and I think she's 16. So she's been at it for some time. So we're seeing that kind of development. And of course, anytime we do things like we have parties or whatever, we also engage the students so that they get used to the gig mentality. They get used to being professional and showing up at the right time and conducting themselves in a professional manner. So it's really lovely to see all of that too. So those are the things that I think are super important. I really hope that we have seen the end of COVID. I know that they're talking right now about more surges, but we at least have vaccines, and the majority, although we'd like it to be bigger, the majority of people are getting the vaccines, and that's changed our lives greatly since the first go round. But I guess for me, the most important thing in jazz is the musicians all seem to be willing to share, and they're willing to do interviews, they're willing to talk to students, they're willing to coach, they're willing to do jam sessions. There is It's such a nurturing environment. And that's another thing that I love about it. It really does feel like family. So yeah, so that's been my life in the trenches of jazz. I feel, it's interesting, from being on the stage to being behind the scenes. I really prefer being behind the scenes. That's one of the things that I've learned about myself. Um, so even when creatively I was making music, like, I still enjoyed it much more at a rehearsal than I did at a performance, where I had to worry about what I was wearing. I think there's just something really fun about being behind the scenes. Um, I owe very much to a lot of my experiences at TriC. I did get to run the Detroit Jazz Festival for about 5 years. And that was also just mind blowing to me, because Detroit is such a music town. It is such an American music town. It has such a soul. The audience is so hip. The audience is so informed. That was truly remarkable. And the other great thing that I owe in my life some incredible debt to is Tommy LaPuma. Um, he came into my life at such a time. I mean, I have to say, I forced the issue, because I remember reading an article about him when I was working at TriC years ago. And I thought, oh my God, he's from Cleveland. I never realized that. And through his brother, who was living here in Cleveland at the time, we actually got to know each other. We developed a relationship, and for our 25th anniversary of the festival, we did a whole tribute to Tommy. I look back at that and still say it was the highlight of my life. But the artists that came to be a part of it were the Diana Kralls and the Al Jarreaus and the George Bensons. It was just great. And we had little Jimmy Scott and Joe Lovano and Michael and Randy Brecker doing their Horace Silver stuff. Horace Silver was with us. He didn't play, but he was with us. We had 2 wonderful nights at Playhouse Square that I will never forget. So I have always a soft spot in my heart for Tommy, and I miss him terribly. So I hope that wasn't too boring. It feels weird to just talk to myself, but I would have loved to have had somebody on the other side asking me questions. But whoever you are out there listening, support this music. Stay in it. Don't get discouraged. If you're a musician, you got to do it, because you can't imagine not doing it. So that's my parting words. So thank you.